but visuals would actually give you, I'm not sure what the visual presentation of chestnut pollen grains are, but it's probably distinctive enough that you could do a yes chestnut, no something else kind of quick assessment. So that still needs to be done. This is just something that we put together in the last few years. So it's not absolute, but all the indicators are strong in the direction.
All right, great. Nicholas is wondering briefly, could you elaborate on which bees might rely on black gum?
There's an interesting paper, if you want to look this up, by Suzanne Batra, B-A-T-R-A, from I can't remember what the years is, but it's been several decades. And if someone emails me, I can probably get the record, and I think I have the paper. Just a really tiny paper on her investigations in the Maryland area of species on black gum, and her argument was, hey, black gum has lots of things going on there. We should look at it some more. She had some preliminary lists. A interesting one, to get a little bit into the weeds, is she found several records of Chelostoma philadelphia. So Chelostoma philadelphia is thought to be a specialist, but a specialist on Philadelphus, which is mock orange. But interestingly, we have some native mock orange, but they're really rare. So it's hard to be a specialist on rare things, right? It turns out, though, that the mock orange that our grandmothers have is a European species, same genus, and almost all the records where we have a floral record seem to come from there. Yet at the same time, we still find Chelostoma philadelphia periodically in the wild, way far away from planted Philadelphus or wild Philadelphus, which have restricted ranges. So it was interesting to see this species on black gum, and it might be that black. And so we did here's the distribution of black gum, here's the distribution of Chelostoma, and it might be that it's a specialist there. There's also a very rare Cleides, and I'm forgetting the species name of the Cleides that showed up on black gum, and we have not collected that species at all in Maryland. So we've been collecting for 2 decades now, and have, I can't remember, I want to say at least regionally about 200,000 records of specimens, and haven't come across that species. So those were intriguing enough, but we're not laying claim. We're just saying, interesting, let's look at this some more. It clearly is a insectivorous bloom system, and black gum occurs, but its sort of MO is like, oh, we're here and there in the woods. We're never a dominant. And there's arguments that chestnut was kind of that way in a lot of these systems. It's never was a dominant. It's a bigger, mostly tree than black gum, but it's the kind of same thing. You want a lot of these in order to maintain your bee population. So it could fit.
Great. All right, I've got a couple of questions from Brad. And before I ask those, someone had raised their hand earlier. If you have a question, please type that in the chat or in the Q&A for us. Jesse, I did see your note that you weren't able to do that. You're a panelist, so you actually don't have access to the Q&A, so I'll get yours in the chat. But Brad has a couple of questions, and I'm just going to ask them all at once. So he's wondering, first, how do you collect samples? Could you give us a quick description? Is that something we could do successfully? And he's also wondering how you're taking all these really awesome HDB pictures.
Okay, so it's really old school. You have a net, and you see bees, usually, so you can do it by, I see a bee, I'm going to catch that bee on that flower and net it off that. Or you can be, I have a big set of bloom chestnuts, and I'm just going to whack the net through all those blooms. So not rocket science. There's better and worse ways to do it, and we have YouTube videos on those kinds of things, not chestnut, but on collecting. So it's very generalized insect collecting kinds of things. Anything else I think is right now would not yield the kind of information we want, which is that we want to know that bee was on a chestnut flower versus that bee was in the area. You could add that component, but I'm not sure what it's going to reveal to you, except that there'll be differences. in terms of the pictures, I can send people how we do that. We're doing studio shots. These are all dead bees. And what we do is each of those shots is a compilation of somewhere around 25 at the very low end to 150 individual shots. And then they're combined so that everything's in focus, and they're done at high magnification for insects or for macro photography. Then we have a bunch of things that we do post-processing to buff them up, so to speak. And we spend a lot of time being bee hairdressers and that kind of thing. And we play around. It's slightly obsessive, I have to admit. So, but we like it, and keeps me going at night.
Yeah, sounds like a fun other thing to work on.
Yeah.
Break from field work. Related to the sampling, Jesse was actually asking kind of the same question in the chat, but he's also wondering if there's instructions or a place they could send collected bees for ID.
All right, so I'm glad you brought that up, and I was wondering if this would come up. So let's say this makes sense to you guys as a collective or individual. The way to approach it, I think, would be to look for the coordinator, not me, because I got a million other things going on. But if you had a coordinator who, and I could work with that person in terms of what's the technique, how do we do that, the kind of information be collected. The core, the nut would be a very simple technique. Find something in bloom, collect bees off of it that you see. There's more that could be added to that that would give more information, but that's going to be the core. Then the bees are, we usually have people just collect, not into the old school would be, here's your cyanide jar. I think we're not doing that anymore. And we just have people collect into soapy water. They get stored in the freezer, and then they would be sent off somewhere and to be processed, and then they would be identified. And we really mostly probably would get involved at the ID end of things just to double check everything because of this trickiness. And I have a couple people who are very interested and are looking for projects in terms of tree pollen relationships. And I'm sure there might be other people, maybe people who are listening right now, looking for a good master's or more project that could involve people from the foundation. I mean, you're not a foundation, you are a trust.
Yeah, we're a foundation. You were right the first time.
Okay.
Should have gone with it.
All right, I talked to so many people. So,
no worries.
So I think it can be done. So those are the two things. Someone who is interested in working up the data, I think I can help find that person. Or
well, Michael Veet actually just volunteered to do that in the chat.
All right, Michael. Right, that's right. He has all the time on his hands now. And then someone who helped coordinate probably would have to be someone within your organization that has access to whatever kind of lists you maintain that make the most sense, either lists to clubs or lists to or posting on the web or list to all the members. There's some thought about would have to go into where that makes the most sense. Maybe a slow start where, and rather than have everyone going crazy, because it's easy. You can make your own net or you can purchase nets. It's not a rocket science thing, but I'm just emphasizing that it's not a, look at, there's Andrina Rennie, I'm going to send in my observation. It's a dead bee thing.
All right. Thanks for your honesty. Well, I think that's all we had for questions, Jamie, unless I think, you had mentioned you had a few of your own, so I can turn it back over to you, but I think I've gotten through everything I found in the chat and the Q&A.
Sure. Well, great. Thank you, Kendra.
Sure.
So I actually kind of dumbing it down for, kind of slow tree guys, and just thinking about with all the things you've covered, what would be interesting. It sounds like this is a really new thing, and you're, as bee people, trust getting your arms around it. So I'm just trying to think about what would be interesting. So you've seen it on chestnut. You've certainly seen it on chinkapin. There are certainly plantings of that we've come across that are of Chinese, and there's a particular large plantation near the Block Island airport of Japanese that of chestnut down there. Is that the type of thing that's interesting? And how would we, if we, can make a mental note, look for the bee here, or if I'm going to be there doing something else, to have a little net and see what you could find. That's the type of thing that's, for most of us, is going to be what's possible. So
yeah. So that would be, that's the ballpark right there. Is a good idea. So I would emphasize that you would want to have this coordinated. So there'd be a coordinator. They would recruit people who are maybe interested, develop their own list, and then there would be a set of rules. Like, this is how rules with some simple explanations. This is the kind of net. When we say net, look for these kinds of nets. When we say netting, this is how more explicitly you're going to want to do netting. Again, this is not rocket science, but I've found that you really have to be clear. And then these are our targets. So it could be, and it would depend on the coordinator, right? And the person who's going to be analyzing the data. I see no reason. I think it'd be very interesting in particular to look at the non-native ones. So you mentioned Chinese, Japanese. Do people grow the European chestnut here too, or not?
I'm sure that it's here there, and also hybrids of those. We call it's called European or sweet chestnut, depending where you are from.
So I would, just off the top of my head, it would probably, at least at the beginning, be best to go with straight species and your backcross orchards as much as possible. So, and thinking of American chestnuts, so there would be two interesting groups, right? Of course, we would want to collect off of wild blooming plants if we could, and compare that to the backcross orchards. So we know no one's collected off wild chestnut that I am aware of in 100 years, let's say. The backcross ones are known now to, that's where we're finding this species in these, in your backcrosses. Chinese, no records yet, but it may be just that we need to spend more effort. It might be that Chinese near American chestnut do it. Whatever it is, it seems like, because we're finding this pretty much everywhere we've looked, the species, that they seem to be both established enough that they can find the orchards and good enough at finding the orchards, right? So and bees in general, we know, are good dispersers. So we know that you plant it and the bees will find it is a thing. And they have to, traditionally, bees have to be flexible enough about finding their plant foods. And when they wake up in the spring, because they don't have any guidance from mom and dad, certainly not dad, they start flying until they find their food source, or whatever the triggers are for their food source. So they'll fly until they're dead. If they don't find, in this case, if everything is lined up, they will fly until they expire to find their chestnuts. And so a lot of times it'll be right there, and other times they may have to fly until they find that orchard. So lots of interesting things going on there.
It sounds like it, and it sounds like working with Michael is the best way if we've got something we want to go. If I'm going out to Block Island and doing some Japanese chestnut work, to touch base with him, and he can guide me in what I could do while I'm there.
Yeah. So Michael, I'll just sing his praises, is one of the best bee people in North America. So you guys are lucky to have him available and interested in this particular project, because it'll be high dollar, high value. But things like Block Island, okay, if you had American chestnut on Block Island, would you still find Rennie out there? Is Chinkapin out there? I think it's too far north, but was American chestnut ever out there?